Well, I'd actually written that piece, oh man, about 15 years earlier, maybe longer, for Nexus, the percussion group Nexus. And I'd put it away for a long time. And I was going through some old videos, and I saw it there. And it was right after this fellow John Wire, who was a founding member of Nexus, percussionist, died. So I thought I'd say, and it was cool because I had Hugh Marsh on it and Michael White. So I was looking for some new material to work for a concert I was doing at Lula Lounge with a classical music group called the Griffin Trio. And I thought, well, this one's cool. So I revisited it and rearranged it, and it worked really well. Everybody liked it, and we did it with my brother. And then, so I had this one thing in the can, and this band, I toured with this band Gorillaz, with Damon Albarn, and they were traveling through Toronto with their drummer, who was the drummer from Fela Kuti. His name is Tony Allen. Really great, the inventor of Afrobeat. So he was in town, and I was hanging out. He came and sat in with us with this quartet at a club. So I said, let's go in the studio. So then we went in the studio and recorded that tune. Somehow we got through it with basically the guys that are on the record there, the David, Luis, myself. And then I started writing. I expanded the string parts that were on it while I was in Europe. So now I had this whole thing together, and this was sort of a genesis, and that made me think, well, I better write some other stuff. So I wrote some other stuff to go along with it, and instead of it being just a little quartet record, which I wanted it to be, it became something else, as it always does.
Now, were the strings recorded here too, or were they?
No, the strings I was doing some work in Russia, in Moscow. So I'd already done the rhythm section stuff here, and I was going to do it with a string quartet, but I had the opportunity to use a 45-piece orchestra. So I thought, I think I'll go with the strings, the string group over there. And so I did on this track and some of the other tracks, and then the rest I did with a string quartet, because the Russians had some problems with some of the stuff I wrote. But the string quartet was good too.
Pretty shrewd undertaking.
Well, it's not so much shrewd. It'd be shrewd if I planned it.
Yeah, but it worked out.
It worked out because it was just serendipitous that I was there, and I was I'd used the strings before on my previous record. Yeah, I had them there. It was the same idea. I was sitting in my room, over the hotel room in Moscow, with an orchestra at my disposal, on jet lag. So I said, well, this is silly, man. I got the opportunity, so I wrote the arrangements in the hotel, and then had them do it, and that's that.
Now, are you at ease orchestrating?
Well, I was a classical. Well, I still am. I'm back playing orchestra music once in a while, and I've done a lot of contemporary music. So it's a roundabout way of saying I'm at ease writing a certain way of stuff for orchestras, just because as they say, you steal from the best. And for years I was playing the Winnipeg Symphony. I played in the opera company. I played with the TS. I always had a great opportunity the best orchestration lessons in the world is sit in an orchestra and just listen what's going on around you all the time. If you can do it night after night, like I did when I was in the opera pit, hearing Puccini or Wagner, or you're listening to the stuff that's all around you, then you can pick up some stuff. I'm not a trained orchestrator or anything like that. I've read some stuff, and basically any sort of commercial things I ever got, I use them as my orchestration exercises. So I'm getting a little better as I keep doing it.
Do you ever think of writing for a larger ensemble, maybe a symphonic piece? Or
not really, no. No, the thing is, I've got too much respect for those composers that I was playing to actually think that I could write something like that. I mean, maybe I'd get into something like that, but it's really not my interest. My interest is to grab a lot of that great stuff there and put it in a jazz context.
How do you separate the role of producer, player, composer, artist?
Well, bass players, for instance, I always relate everything back to the fact that I'm a bass player, and everything I do is determined by that. In terms of my part of the reason I listen to the orchestration is because I'm listening to the bass parts underneath. I get to hear all the other stuff that I know what the underlying structure is, so I get to hear what's on top of it. And to be a good bass player, you have to be aware. You have to be aware of what the melody and the harmony is going to make up your own parts to go with it. I call it walking bass. I never call it a bass line. I tell the students, I say, you always have to think of it as a counter melody. You have to think of it. It happens to serve a harmonic function, and it has to do that, but you transcribe a Ray Brown bass line, and you can just listen to that. That's like it's as good as any tune you ever came across. So, again, these are my long-winded ways of saying that because everything comes from playing the bass, developing a bass line, being a good bass player, then you in effect become an arranger, and you become a composer just because you're deciding these structures. Once you get to that point, then you say, well, what's this really? I want to hear this in such and such a way. So most of the time, I get into the producing stuff from that point of view. Is just I just want whatever anybody's doing, whether it's me or somebody else, their stuff to sound as good as what they're aspiring to do. So I'm not a producer in the sense that I'm not working with Lady Gaga or Avril Lavigne or the pop kind of thing, which is a completely different thing. My thing is I always like to work with good musicians who really know what they want, and I'm just a facilitator to make them get what they want. When I produce myself, I use those other people that are on the session to make me sound better.
Now, how important is the role of the engineer? Do you have an engineer or a few that you work with that you know you can depend on, that hear things like you hear it?
Yeah, well, actually, I hope they don't hear things the way I hear it. What I do is I work with a number of really great engineers. What I try to do, if I can, my philosophy always, I would get one engineer to track, I'd have another engineer to mix, and I always master with somebody else completely. So I usually do all my mastering with a guy named Peter Moore. I've worked with Jeff Wolpert, John Bailey, a bunch of great Canadian engineers for mixing, and sometimes they record them, sometimes they mix them. Todd Ferracci, I've used him a number of times to record, because I look at it this way: I have to pay them anyway. So if we're gonna pay, might as well pay for 6 pairs of ears instead of 3. Yeah, instead of 3, that'd be some alien. Instead of 2, So I always like that, because then I have the, like the checks and balances of all the other technicians that are involved with it. Having said that, I have a bit of an engineering background. I've engineered on some sessions years ago, which I recommend you do once or twice and then never do again, because it's a completely thankless task. But the one thing I did learn how to do is I know how to edit in Pro Tools. So I do all my own editing now. It makes a huge difference, because then I don't have to spend $200 an hour at some studio to do it. I'll do it at home, and I'll know the music that, the way a musician will know the music versus a technician. So I don't have to say, I can just, there's one less person to get in the way. Then when I get it to the sessions, the engineers always end up cleaning my edits up anyway. But at least I've done all the legwork. When we get to mixing and stuff, we don't have to think about editing anymore. We've already done that.
What are the most difficult sessions to, let's say, edit or mix?